Ever feel like life's just hit the fast forward button? Like everything's changing at once.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not always bad change either, right?
Mhm.
It's good stuff, new job promotion maybe, or finally moving to that city you've always dreamed of.
Right.
But still, it can feel kind of overwhelming, like having way too many tabs open in your brain all at the same time. That's
Definitely.
what they call cognitive overload, and it can be a real drag, right?
You really can.
So today we're going to give a deep dive into why change, even the good kind, can be so darn stressful.
Okay.
We're going to look at some practical strategies to kind of help us ride those waves of change,
Mm-hmm.
without getting totally wiped out.
That's good.
And to help us illustrate these strategies, we're going to follow the story of someone we're calling Mia.
All right.
Mia is dealing with a bunch of big life changes. All at the same time, she just landed a new job. She's moving to a new city. And oh yeah, she's planning a wedding.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is right.
Mm.
You can probably already imagine how juggling all that could lead to feeling a little well overloaded.
Absolutely. And, it's important to remember that our brains aren't really wired for this kind of constant change.
Right.
Uncertainty triggers a stress response in our brains. It's like this built-in survival mechanism.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's this neuroscientist, Dr. Kelly McGonigal. She's done a ton of research on this.
Interesting.
Basically, when we're faced with something new or unexpected, our amygdala, that's the part of the brain that processes emotions like fear,
Huh?
It
Yeah.
kind of freaks out a little bit, sends out all these stress signals.
Like a little alarm bell going off.
Exactly. And that response, it's super helpful if you're actually in danger.
Right, like if you're running from a bear or something.
Yeah, exactly. But when it's just life changes, new job, new apartment, it can make us feel anxious and overwhelmed for no good reason.
Totally. So in Mia's case, all this change and uncertainty really started to take a toll on her. She was anxious, she wasn't sleeping well, and she was having a hard time focusing at work.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But then she discovered this really simple but powerful technique that helped her turn things around.
Oh, what's that?
She started labeling her emotions.
Mm.
Just saying to herself, okay, I'm feeling anxious right now, or wow, I'm really overwhelmed. It sounds kind of basic, but it made a huge difference for her.
I can see how that would help. I mean, I know when I'm feeling stressed, just acknowledging it out loud sometimes helps me calm down a bit.
Right, me too.
Yeah,
It's like it takes some of the power away from the emotion.
totally. And there's actually some solid science behind this. Dr. Susan David. She's a psychologist who's done a lot of work on emotional agility.
Okay.
She says that when we label our emotions, we create a little bit of space between us and the feeling,
Uh-huh.
And that space allows us to respond to the feeling instead of just reacting to it. We're not so caught up in the emotion anymore.
That makes total sense.
Mm.
So what other strategies did Mia use to kind of get a handle on all this change?
Well, one thing she did was prioritize. Instead of trying to tackle everything at once, she focused on the change that was causing her the most stress in that moment, which was the new job.
So she picked one thing to focus on.
Exactly. She figured if she could get comfortable in the new role, the rest would feel a little less overwhelming.
That's a great approach. But what if you're dealing with multiple changes that all feel urgent? How do you decide which one to prioritize?
That's a tough one. I think it comes down to figuring out which change, if you don't address it right away, will have the biggest negative impact on your life.
Okay, so it's not necessarily the one with the closest deadline, but the one that's causing the most stress or disruption.
Right, exactly. Sometimes it's a tough call, but it's worth taking the time to really think about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So another strategy that Nia found really helpful was setting what she called micro-adaptive goals.
Micro-adaptive goals.
Yeah, it's basically just a fancy way of saying she broke down her big, overwhelming goals into smaller, more manageable steps. Like instead of trying to master every aspect of her new job right away, she focused on learning one new process each week.
That's a good idea.
Right. It's all about making those small wins and celebrating those small victories along the way.
Definitely. Those little wins can really help you stay motivated when you're facing a big change.
For sure. And it's also important to remember that navigating all this change, it takes energy. It can be exhausting.
Oh, absolutely. It's like running a marathon. You can't just keep sprinting. You need to pace yourself.
Exactly. So that's where intentional recovery comes in.
Intentional recovery. What's that?
It's basically just making time for activities that help you de-stress and recharge. Things like journaling, going for walks, spending time in nature, meditation.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I've been trying to do more of that lately myself, just taking a few minutes each day to kind of unplug and unwind.
It makes a big difference,
Yeah.
right? And there's a lot of research to back this up. Dr. Andrew Huberman, He's a neuroscientist at Stanford.
Okay.
He talks a lot about the importance of giving our brains and bodies time to recover from stress.
Interesting.
He says that these recovery practices, they can actually help regulate your nervous system and make you more resilient in the face of change.
So it's not just about feeling better in the moment, it's actually changing the way our brains respond to stress.
Exactly. And finally, I want to touch on one more strategy that Mia found really helpful, and that's reframing expectations.
Reframing expectations.
Yes, it's basically about letting go of the need for perfection and embracing a more flexible mindset.
Oh, I like that.
Right. It's about recognizing that things are probably going to be messy and imperfect, especially during times of change. And that's okay.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in trying to do everything perfectly.
Totally. And there's this amazing researcher, Brené Brown. She's done a lot of work on self-compassion.
Oh, yeah, I love her work.
She talks about how important it is to be kind to ourselves,
Right.
especially when we're going through tough transition.
Absolutely. We need to give ourselves a break.
For sure. So to wrap things up, what are some of the key takeaways you want to leave our listeners with today?
Well, first off, I think it's important to remember that feeling stressed during times of change is completely normal.
Right.
It's not a sign of weakness. It's just your brain doing its thing, trying to protect you.
Yeah, we all go through it.
Exactly. And the good news is there are things you can do to manage that stress and make those transitions a little bit easier.
Like what?
Well, we talked about a few things today, like labeling your emotions, prioritizing setting those micro-adaptive goals, making time for intentional recovery,
Right.
and of course, being kind to yourself.
Absolutely. So listeners, I want to challenge you to think about 3 recent changes in your own life. How are these changes impacting you emotionally and mentally? Which change is causing you the most stress right now? And what's one small action you can take today to address that stress?
I love that.
Maybe it's writing down how you're feeling.
Mhm.
Maybe it's setting a tiny goal that you can achieve today. Maybe it's just taking a few minutes to step away from everything and take some deep breaths.
All good ideas.
And to really make these practices stick, choose one of those recovery techniques we talked about today and commit to doing it every day, even if it's just for 5 minutes.
Great advice.
And finally, here's something to ponder. How might reframing your expectations around change help you approach those transitions with more ease and self-compassion? Keep exploring, keep learning, and remember, you've got this.
You really do.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It was fun.
See you next time.